let's make the relationship very clear. The United States of America is the world's most powerful superpower. Israel is not. Now we can go down the path of a lot of anti-Semitic tropes, talk about how Jews control everything and all this stuff. I'm not going that route. What I'm saying is straight up, there's a pro-Israeli lobby in the United States that exerts significant influence on policy matters as they relate to Israel and the Middle East. That's it. I think what Israel will find out, though, is that make America first, make America great again trumps Israel. We will do what needs to be done to appease the Israeli lobby to make sure that the Israelis feel that they haven't been neglected. Trump will do any number of policy. We saw that in his first term, moving the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, etc. Israel doesn't direct the United States. Israel doesn't control the United States. Israel can't destroy the United States. The United States can eliminate Israel anytime we want to. Israel exists only because we allow it to exist, because we facilitate its existence. Now, in the Cold War period, there was a mutually beneficial relationship to have, in effect, a land-based aircraft carrier right there in the Mediterranean to give the United States the ability to project power via proxy to control Russian influence in the Middle East. Today, there's not so much benefit to be had by with Israel and its geopolitical significance of its geography. It's purely political. It's purely the extent to which the Israeli lobby has bought Congress on matters pertaining to. But at the end of the day, Israel will never, ever, ever be allowed to position itself to bring harm to the United States of America, to threaten the national security of the United States of America in a meaningful fashion. We can talk about peripheral threats. I'm talking about to do something that brings about the collapse of the United States. Let me remind people that in the 1980s, there was a guy named Jonathan Pollard. He was an American intelligence analyst, and he was directed by Israeli intelligence, by an Israeli intelligence officer in the Embassy of Israel in Washington, D.C., to basically steal the crown jewels of American intelligence. It's the Bible that has all of the frequencies that we collect upon in the SIGINT world. These are frequencies that are developed over years, painstakingly. If the enemy finds out that we know what a frequency is, they change it, and then it's no good. This is the Bible that said this is what each frequency did, how it's encrypted, how we've defeated the encryption, the whole works. Scores of American lives were lost gathering this information. I just want to remind, this is the Cold War when we had C-130s get brought down over Armenia. They were doing a SIGINT track. We had other aircraft go down collecting this data. And basically, Pollard took this book and gave it to the Israelis. Then the Israelis took this book and gave it to the Soviets in exchange for getting beneficial immigration policy out of the Soviet Union. So basically, they gave the Soviets the Bible on how we collect intelligence against Soviet SIGINT. It damaged American national security. The Israelis did that. The FBI will tell you that the number one collector of intelligence against the American target in the United States is Israel. Not Russia, not Iran, not China, Israel. Israel's the greatest threat to American security. Israel only cares about Israel. They don't care about us. They only act on their benefit. They view us as a tool to benefit them. So Israel is not an ally of the United States. Israel is not a friend of the United States. Israel uses the United States like a parasite uses a host. The Russians have been very much against Israel's actions in Gaza. Russia has sought, if you remember, it was the Russians that initiated the process of bringing 14 Palestinian factions together, including Hamas, to create a political singularity that would undermine American Israeli objections to Hamas, being the government in Gaza. The idea was to recreate the government, rename it, and have Hamas play a supporting role, not the leading role. Russia initiated that. Then the Chinese picked it up because there's some complexity in the Russian Middle East posture. Remember, Russia was in Syria Russia was opposing Iranian expansion into Syria. Russia was greenlighting Israeli bombing of Syria, and so it was a complicated situation for the Russians to take the lead. But the Russians likewise are not supportive of Donald Trump's policies. But what can Russia do? Russia can only speak out, formulate policy, continue to do diplomacy behind the scenes. But the Russians aren't the heavy hitters in the region that people might think they are. They are heavily beholden to Israel, and they have their own pro-Israeli lobby. Many of the Russian oligarchs, these billionaires that are the secret power behind the Russian economy, are dual citizens with Israel. And so, Russia has an Israeli problem, just like the United States has an Israeli problem. This is a huge humiliation for Benjamin Netanyahu, the man who, since the mid-1990s, has sold himself as the de facto guru of Israeli national security, Israeli defense issues. He alone, Netanyahu alone, can solve these problems. And here we have a situation where there is a problem that for the past 15 months he couldn't solve. Hamas, Gaza. And Donald Trump's come in and said, I got this. Sit down, shut up. That's pretty much what Trump told him. And so this is a humiliation for Netanyahu. He can't take any solace from this. This isn't a chest thumping period for him. This is, a chastised teenage boy sort of coming out of the principal's office trying to spin it that, no, everything's okay. I was only suspended for 3 days, not a week. But no, this isn't a victory for Netanyahu at all. Because again, as you pointed out, none of this is going to happen. Look to the extent to which the Biden administration was held hostage by the Israelis. Right. Everything had to be run by Netanyahu. Everything had to get the Israeli permission. Everything. Trump's saying, I don't need your permission. I'm not seeking your permission. I'm not asking your permission. I'm taking charge. That's what he gains. He has made the United States the only voice when it comes to resolution of this issue. He's pushed Israel to the side. And like I said, I think at some point in time, there will be counter proposals put on the table that Trump and Trump alone will respond to. He's not going to allow Netanyahu to once again muddy the waters. And I think that's what Trump gains. This is the initiating phase of negotiations. Look, Judge, let's be honest. I don't know, and you don't know. Nobody knows what's going through Trump's head. By wrapping himself with these Zionists, they are, for instance, what is Elise Stefanik going to do? The President of the United States has now put forward a policy. He didn't coordinate with her. This didn't go through State Department. The United Nations didn't receive talking points. What is she going to do? Go before the Security Council and contradict the President of the United States? No, he controls her. What is Mike Huckabee going to do? The ambassador, ultra-Zionist. What influence does he have? None. Marco Rubio wasn't a player in this. Hegseth, nothing. They're all responding to Trump. They're not advising Trump. Everybody had sat there and said the Zionists are going to control Trump. So all the people out there, they're going, oh, these are the worst Zionists in the world, this, that, and the other thing. Yeah, on paper, it looks that way. How did they influence this policy? Tell me how, and the answer is they didn't. And so, and the other thing is, I think Trump is doing that because if you brought Israel in, that complicates the art of the deal. You see, right now, there's only one player who's negotiating on behalf of the United States and its position in Gaza, and that's Donald Trump, because it's only an American position. And I believe that he's put this position out there, not because he's going to implement it, because he can't, but because he's trying to create the conditions where people, in order to forestall the potential of him trying to implement, will say, no, here's a counter proposal. This is a counter proposal. And it's going to be a clean counter proposal because it only deals with them and the United States. There won't be any Israeli aspect to it at all because Donald Trump hasn't allowed Israel to become embroiled in the Gaza issue. I think what Trump is going to work on next is getting the Saudis to help underwrite the cost of rebuilding Gaza, to get them to chip in into whatever counter proposal ends up being put out there. But the idea that Saudi Arabia is now a strong, hard, fast supporter of the Palestinian cause is absurd. We saw that the Saudis The senior members of the Saudi government have come out condemning Hamas, speaking out against Hamas. The Saudis secretly would love to see the Palestinians removed from Gaza because that would disenfranchise Hamas. Politically, they can't do it. So I think there's more to the Saudi posturing than meets the eye. But let's just remind everybody that Donald Trump and Saudi Arabia, collaborated during his first term to bring about the Abraham Accords. And the Abraham Accords were a series of agreements that would lead to the normalization of relations between Israel and the Gulf Arab states to create an environment conducive to business. And Saudi Arabia and Israel were ready to normalize relations on October 6th of 2023. Because of the Hamas attack against Israel on October 7th, that didn't happen. But at the time, Saudi Arabia is willing to sell Palestine down the road, had already sold Palestine down the road, had created the conditions that there wouldn't be a Palestinian state. So let's not pretend that Saudi Arabia is suddenly now a born-again champion of the Palestinian cause. What's happened is that Israel has made it almost impossible for Saudi Arabia to go back to that deal because of the genocide that was carried out against the Palestinians in Gaza, and the fact that the world has rejected that, the Arab street has turned against it. So this is about domestic Saudi politics more than it is about suddenly the Saudis growing a conscience. So the notion that Netanyahu is calling the shots is as absurd as the day is long. Donald Trump is in charge. He is influenced by a pro-Israeli lobby, but he and he alone is calling the shots. And I need not remind people, he's not running for office again. He doesn't have to appease anybody. What he needs to do, if he wants to continue the MAGA legacy to facilitate transfer of power to J.D. Vance in 4 years, is have successful foreign policy, not to allow the United States to be dragged into yet another Middle East entanglement. Remember, it is Donald Trump who reposted Jeffrey Sachs calling out Netanyahu for getting America caught up in wars that we didn't need to be caught up in the Middle East. Donald Trump reposted those because he believes that. He believes that Netanyahu led him down that path. So there's just no way that Donald Trump is going to allow Netanyahu to take us down that path again. And I think this is clear. He has put forward a policy projection on Gaza that incorporates a lot of, what Israel wanted to do, get the Palestinians out, rebuild, etc. Except he's done it in a way that keeps Israel out of it. He's not saying we're sharing this with you. This belongs to you. He said this belongs to me. This is America's. We're doing this. And that's putting Israel in its place. So the only way that Israel can pull this off is if America joins in. And America's not going to join in. It just isn't going to happen. This is a story that gets told all the time by reporters who are trying to shape agendas. Benjamin Netanyahu will not unilaterally attack Iran, especially at a time when the President of the United States is talking about engaging with Iran diplomatically to resolve differences over the nuclear issue so that, Iran can join BRICS and join the family of nations and things will become normal again. They've done this before. It's not like the Washington Post is going, oh my God, Israel is concerned about Iran's nuclear, and they're talking about bombing. Oh my, it's been going on for decades. Israel's been talking about doing preemptive strikes in Iran since 2002, when the whole nuclear issue rose up. But the thing that the Israelis always had to have the United States involved because Israel does not have the power, the ability to project meaningful air power into Iran for a sustainable period of time to successfully strike the targets that need to be struck. If Israel initiates this attack, Iran will saturate Israel with thousands of missiles that will make Israel cease to exist. That's the strategic direction that Trump is headed. And, he has basically taken a preemptive strike on Iran off the table. He won't ever admit to that because that's part of the negotiating strategy. But I think people have to stop pretending that Netanyahu has any power or influence. I just refer you to your good friend Jeffrey Sachs, whose videos were posted by Donald Trump on his social media account. saying that Netanyahu is the scum of the earth. He's a betrayer. He's put America in a bad position. He got us involved in these wars, that wars. Why would Trump do that if he's going to sit around and allow Netanyahu to take him down another war, an even bigger war in Iran? People have to start using their brains here. Just because it appears in the Washington Post doesn't mean, in fact, if it appears in the Washington Post, it probably means that it's pure propaganda, that it's designed to create a perception about a need that there isn't a need for. The United States is not in the business of bombing Iran right now. It's the last thing we want to do under Donald Trump. It would require a tremendous allocation of military resources. And if you're going to start a war with Iran, that's going to require us to commit military forces to secure the Strait of Hormuz, to defeat Iran, because once we initiate this, it isn't going to end overnight. We're talking about 500,700,000 troops. Where are they coming from? We don't have that big of a military. There's talk that we can't even win one war. It used to be we had to fight and win 2.5 wars. There's talk now that we can't even win one war. And then we're going to go waste it on a war of choice against Iran when there is a viable window of opportunity for negotiation. Come on, people. They just have to start using your mind. It isn't going to happen. Again, resources that we want to allocate to the Pacific. Hegseth said our priorities are the American fortress and the Pacific. If you have to put 300,000 troops in Gaza, those aren't your priorities anymore, which is why it was never going to happen. Netanyahu is a bug. Donald Trump is a thumb. Anytime the thumb wants to, it can crush the bug. Again, all the people that blew up. I mean, I got so much hate message. I don't care. This is what people don't have to understand. I don't care because I know I'm right. I'm an analyst. I do this for a living. And yeah, I can get wrong, but on the big things, no. This was never going to be that. He was looking for the counter proposal, and now he got it. So for all the people that threw their hair out, blew their faces up, called everybody who didn't demand Donald Trump be killed by Palestinian terrorists and defense, take a chill pill. Just relax. You know what's not happening in Gaza right now? Genocide. And the people that were running against Donald Trump to be the commander-in-chief of America, they were practitioners of genocide. You know who's not at the table with the Egyptians talking about the future of Gaza? Israel. So for all you Trump haters out there, and there's so many of you, who say, hey, he surrounded himself with Zionists. Yeah. Keep your friends close, but keep your enemies closer. Who's the closest people to Trump right now? The Zionists. But where are they in Gaza? Where's Israel in Gaza? Where's the Israeli military? They used to have that Kogat, that military civilian occupation force that oversaw every aspect of life in Gaza. It's not going to be meeting with the Egyptians about it. Kogat's finished. The Israeli occupation is done. Trump announced that when he announced his policy in front of Netanyahu, another man who was white-knuckling it through the whole thing, going, what the hell's going on here? Because Trump's just playing by his own game, his own rules. Miriam Adelson gave him $100 million. Yeah. And Israel's not going to have anything to do with Gaza going forward. A lot of good that money did, right? Because Trump's doing what Trump needs to do to create the conditions for the peace that Trump wants, not the peace Israel wants, not the peace the Zionists want, the peace that Trump wants. Because you can sit there and make fun of him all you want. MAGA, make Israel great again. Screw you. It's make America great again. And wake up to that reality. The fact of the matter is there's a completely different game being played right now in Gaza. Completely different game. Everybody, was it this time last week we were talking about Donald Trump's, initiative to depopulate forcefully and all. And I think I told you the same thing I've told everybody. This plan was never going to happen. In practical, couldn't happen. It was a negotiating ploy by Donald Trump. And guess what? I said what he's looking for is the counter proposal. He now has the counter proposal. Egypt came in. Now there's going to be an emergency meeting between the Egyptians, the Jordanians, the Saudis, Qatar, United Arab Emirates, and they're going to talk about how they can go in and do a counter to Trump's proposal. You guys can make fun of Donald Trump all you want. I've done so in the past. There's a lot to be made fun of. He's not a traditional politician at all. He says things that are just outlandish and outrageous, and it can cause your blood to boil. Anybody who has any modicum of intelligence knew that that was not a serious plan. From a military perspective, it was unimplementable. First of all, you're not going to get American troops to go on the ground and commit genocide. Not on that, not that way, not ethnic cleansing. Plus, you need 100,000 of them, which means you need 300,000 of them. We just don't have those troops. We're talking about pulling 20,000 out of Europe because we need to get them over the Pacific. We're not going to just suddenly suck the entire life out of our Pacific initiative to occupy Gaza illegally and commit genocide. It was never going to happen. But the whole purpose of it was to give Trump the ability to put leverage on Middle Eastern leaders who never before would have stood up to help the Palestinians. You guys can say what you want about Donald Trump. He got the Egyptians to say, no, we're going to go into Gaza and we're going to take the lead on all this. Egypt, which never did that before, didn't want to touch Gaza, didn't want to have anything to do with Gaza, now has taken ownership of Gaza because Trump made them with his proposal. And Egypt had to come up with a counter. Did you see the Jordanian king sitting next to Trump? I mean, he could have been a star on the movie One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. He was going insane in place. Couldn't keep his eyes up. His face was twitching. Because he was understanding that if he did what Trump wanted him to do, he was a dead man walking. He couldn't even return to Amman because they'd pull him off the airplane and kill him. So he agreed to one thing. I'll take 2,000 Palestinian children, but Sisi, do something. And Sisi's like, I ain't even talking to Trump. Screw it. I'm going in. We're committing now. Preempt this thing. Go in. And Trump went immediately. Marco Rubio went, that's what we're looking for. Counter proposal. Now we got something to talk about. Donald Trump's going to do what's best for the United States of America. And the best thing to happen for the United States of America is to end 50 years of failed policy. People criticize him. He's pulled the financial plug on UNRWA. Yes. You want to know why he pulled the plug on UNRWA? Because UNRWA only existed to sustain the failure of the world to deal with the reality of Palestine. All it did is sustain an open-air concentration camp. And to sit there and go back and say, well, we're going to continue to fund the United Nations Relief Organization meant you're going to continue to allow Gaza to exist as an open-air concentration camp. By pulling the plug on UNRWA, you compelled the Arab world, which never before stepped in, to step in now, to do the funding. It's a completely different funding stream for a completely different outcome, not a concentration camp, not a refugee camp occupied by the Israelis, but a free and independent Palestinian entity in Gaza. That's the direction we're heading here. And you know who made it possible? Donald frickin' Trump. And then you ask the question, what can Russia bring to the table? Helping create a Palestinian government that will be acceptable to the United States and Israel. That's what Russia can bring to the table. That's what China can bring. China can also help with reconstruction dollars. But, the Russians can help out by working with the Palestinian factions to craft a governing entity that's acceptable both to the Palestinian people, who have to recognize the role played by Hamas in achieving this victory, by the way, and the United States and Israel, which can't accept a terrorist organization known as Hamas being in charge. But we've made these compromises before. You remember in Rojava, in Syria, the Syrian Kurdish part, used to be this organization called the YPG. They're still there. But we were going in to fight ISIS, and we sent our troops in there, and they were starting to coordinate with these guys. And all of a sudden we went, oh, we can't really talk to you, can you? Because you guys are really the PKK. And the PKK is a terrorist organization. My God, we can't be working with the terrorists now, can we? So how did they solve it? Brought in a general. He sat down with the head terrorist and said, we're just going to rename you. We're not going to call you YPG anymore because that makes you terrorists. We're going to call you the Syrian Democratic Forces. Got a ring to it. Syrian Democratic Forces, SDF. Guys, they're not terrorists here anymore. They're good people. We renamed them. And so now we can flow in the money. And that's what's going to happen in Gaza. There will be some structural changes. There'll be some personalities swapped around, but they won't call it Hamas anymore. They're going to call it something else. And America's going to go, as long as it's not called Hamas, it's good for us. And I think that's what Russia's going to help out with. That's the most likely venue. I think also Trump wanted to talk about, what Russia plans on doing if it remains in Syria, what role Russia would play in the region, because Trump's talking about pulling American troops out of Syria. And he's a little concerned that if he pulls out of Syria, but the Russians remain in Syria, what's happened. So I think he wanted to know what Russia's intent was. What is their intent now that Bashar al-Assad is no longer in power? What's going on? Well, Putin just had a phone call with Jolani, and so there's normalization taking place here. So maybe the Russian role will become a more positive role, and that's okay for the United States because remember, we're trying to unplug from the region. So if we're comfortable with the Russian role, saying, well, that brings stability without threatening, our national security. So I think this is probably the kind of conversations they were having. Purely speculative on my part, but it's what would make sense. I think the Russians have some say into what the future governing body will be in Gaza. The Russians recognize the impracticality of insisting that Hamas remain in charge as it's currently configured and labeled. That's a political impossibility, and the Russians deal in the world of reality, which is why the Russians brought 14 different Palestinian groups together in Moscow to try and come up with a, this new singularity where Hamas would be a part of it, but not named Hamas and not be the leader of it. The Russians then passed the baton off to the Chinese, and I guess they had a second meeting in Beijing where they talked about the same thing. I think Russia could play a very important role in that. I am so fed up with these people that claim to be pro-Palestinian, claim to be, oh, this, oh, that, oh, that. What the heck have you done to create a free and independent Palestinian state? Now, it isn't done yet. We can't pop the champagne corks and declare victory, but we are on a different path, a path that has never been taken before. And it's a path that's leading to the real possibility in 3 to 5 years of a Gaza that's been reconstructed by Arabs, for the Gazans, for the Palestinians, all but inevitable. So the easiest thing Trump can do right now, once he begins talking with the Russians, see, you have to solve the Ukraine problem. And then you have to tell the Russians, we no longer have a policy seeking your strategic defeat. That policy used to be implemented via proxy in Ukraine. Once we solve that problem, then we have to convince the Russians that we're not looking for another vector to strategically defeat Russia, that we aren't in that game anymore. And once we do that, and the Russians believe that, then we can come in and say, let's talk arms control. But the first thing we have to do is extend New START by 5 years. Get that extension in there. What that does is it prevents an arms race. And then we can sit down with the Russians and say, how do we cut? And meanwhile, you send a signal to the Chinese saying, look, we extended it, we've frozen it, now we're talking about cutting it. What we need you to do is slow down. We're not in a treaty relationship with you yet, but, stabilize find a number that you're going to stabilize at so that we have a mark we can bring it down to. And then when we're all equal, we can get together. But here comes the hard part. How do you get the Chinese to get rid of nuclear weapons or meaningful strategic cuts when India has a nuclear arsenal? So India's got to get involved in this. But how do you get India involved without Pakistan getting involved? And how do you get Pakistan involved without getting Israel involved? And what he wants is basically to create the big three. Now, I think Modi in India might have some issues with that. India might have to become the modern day version of France, where you're carving up Germany at the end of the war and the Russians are going, we're here. The British are going, we're here. And the Americans are going, we're here. And the French are going, but what's about us? We're here too. Oh, yeah. Okay. Give the French a little bit thing here. So we might have to make room for India. I don't know. I hope the Indians watching this don't get mad at me because they are a big power. But in Trump's mind, although Modi was just there, I mean, think about it. Of all the players, has he met with Putin yet? Has he met with Xi yet? No. He pulled the chair out for Modi and pushed him in. All right. So he's met with Modi. So Trump's not stupid. Trump's pretty damn smart. And what he wants is to get together and he looks at the problems of the United States. $34 trillion, $36 trillion. Hell, who the hell knows? We found out that America can't account for anything anymore, so it could be whatever the hell we want it to be. But we do know that left unchecked because of interest rates and everything, it's going to be $54 trillion before we know it. And then it just gets out of control. It's already out of control. And he wants to bring it in control. And one of the ways you do that is to bring control on defense spending. He said, I want to cut the defense budget in half. That's easily done. Hell, I've written about this in the past. It's the easiest thing in the world to do once you just accept the necessity of doing it and not being afraid to step on toes of people who make money for doing nothing. Because right now, a whole bunch of our defense budget is giving it to people who do nothing to promote the defense of America.